The Florida heat in July is no joke. Even inside the thick, reinforced glass of Miami International Airport, MIA, where the heavy-duty air conditioning system was growling at full blast, the air still held an invisible, suffocating humidity. The scent of burnt, stale Starbucks coffee mingled with expensive perfumes and the hurried musk of thousands of passengers, creating a distinct aroma of controlled chaos. Sergeant Mike Carter adjusted his uniform collar, sweat beading at the nape of his neck, even though he was standing in the shade. Next to him, Bolt, a purebred German Shepherd K9 police dog, moved with an inherent, quiet dignity. Bolt was the embodiment of strength and discipline. His sleek black and tan coat shimmered under the fluorescent lights, muscles coiling beneath the thick skin. Bolt's erect ears constantly swiveled like miniature radar dishes, filtering out the noise of rolling luggage and PA announcements to listen for anything unusual. Today, they were on patrol in Concourse D, the exclusive area for business and first-class passengers. Here, the typical airport cacophony subsided, replaced by the hushed luxury of expensive suits and glossy Louis Vuitton carry-ons. "Almost done, big guy. End of shift soon," Carter murmured, loosely holding the leather leash in his left hand. Bolt lightly nudged his wet, black nose, tongue hanging out slightly to dissipate heat. Everything seemed routine. But then, just as they passed the oversized baggage drop-off counter, Bolt abruptly froze. The stop was so sudden and solid that Carter nearly tripped over his own feet. The leash snapped taut, like a guitar string pulled to the breaking point. "What is it, Bolt?" "Find something," Carter whispered, his eyes instinctively scanning the surroundings, his hand hovering over his sidearm. Bolt wasn't looking at the waiting passengers. The dog's head was lowered, his nose inhaling the air sharply, producing rapid, wheezing snorts, his nostrils fluttering nonstop. His deep, intelligent brown eyes were fixed intensely on a man wearing an airport baggage handler uniform, pushing a dangerously tall stack of luggage on a cart. Something was off. Carter felt the tension transfer from Bolt's steel-hardened muscles right up the leash. The worker wore a baseball cap pulled low, obscuring most of his face. He was pushing the cart hastily, trying to weave through a narrow gap between two concrete columns, aiming for the automated baggage intake door, where massive conveyor belts swallowed luggage whole and sent it underground. Perched precariously on top of the jumble of suitcases was a large, black, hard-shell plastic case, the kind of heavy-duty Pelican container used for transporting expensive camera equipment or musical instruments. It was enormous, easily large enough to hold a cello, and its sides were plastered with bright red stickers. "Fragile. Handle with care." Bolt began to whine a low, guttural sound. The fur on the back of his neck bristled in a long strip down his spine, yet his tail was tucked low, wagging in extreme confusion. Carter frowned. This reaction wasn't textbook. Bolt had never behaved like this in their 5 years of service. What was he signaling? He looked closer at the man. The navy blue uniform looked a bit tight across the shoulders. And more importantly, the shoes he wore weren't the standard non-slip safety boots of airport employees. They were expensive, scuffed sneakers. And the sweat. The man was dripping wet, soaking his back, despite the cool temperature in the VIP area. His hands trembled as he struggled to balance the huge plastic case on top, his eyes darting frantically around. Carter's police. Instinct screamed a warning in his head. "Hey, pal. You," Carter called out loudly, quickening his pace toward the cart, his voice hardening. "Stop for a quick check." The man jumped as if electrocuted. He turned his head, and in that split second, Carter saw the raw panic in his eyes. He wasn't an employee. He was an imposter, a professional luggage thief trying to hustle his latest big score that he must have snatched from some distracted passenger. Instead of stopping, the man gritted his teeth, throwing his full weight onto the handles of the baggage cart. "Get out of the way," he yelled at a group of passengers blocking his path, his voice cracking with fear. "Boldbirgt." A sharp, powerful woof echoed through the VIP lounge, making everyone jump. But immediately after, The bark morphed into a long, urgent string of barks, sounding like a desperate alarm siren. Bolt lunged forward, front paws scrambling, wanting to launch himself at that black plastic case at all costs. "Police! Stop right there!" Carter roared, his right hand drawing his collapsible baton, his left struggling to maintain a grip on the leash, which Bolt was pulling to its absolute limit. The thief knew he couldn't escape while pushing this heavy pile of luggage. He was standing right on the edge of the ramp leading down to the baggage processing area, a sloped pathway covered in black rubber matting where workers usually let carts coast down into the subterranean sorting machinery. This area was strictly restricted and obviously extremely dangerous due to the massive machinery. The man's eyes flickered, and then he did something that made Carter's heart leap into his throat. He didn't abandon the cart. He used it as a weapon to block the path. With a powerful shove of his shoulder, the thief slammed the cart, hundreds of pounds of luggage, down the slope. The cart lost all control, flying rapidly like a giant snowball, its wheels shrieking on the polished tile floor before hitting the edge of the ramp. "No!" Carter bellowed. Simultaneously, the thief used the chaos as the crowd screamed and scattered, turning and vanishing quickly into the startled throng, disappearing behind the large pillars. But Carter couldn't pursue him. The real danger, the thing that had triggered Bolt's sheer panic, lay on that careening cart. The cart sped down the ramp at terrifying speed. When the front wheels hit the speed bump at the bottom, inertia flung everything airborne. Smaller suitcases scattered and bounced onto the concrete floor below. But the enormous black plastic case marked fragile was not so lucky. It was hurled from the top of the cart, flipping several times in the air before slamming onto a wide, rumbling industrial conveyor belt. Crash! The dry, deafening impact rang out amidst the noise of the machinery. The case slid, spun, and then settled precariously on conveyor belt number 7. Bolt vimperet. A sound of pain as if he himself had been struck. Without waiting for Carter's command, the formidable German shepherd ripped the leash from his handler's grasp, who was off balance from a sudden tug. "Bolt! Stop!" Carter yelled fruitlessly, reaching for the dropped leather strap. But Bolt had already launched. He vaulted over the safety railing, launching himself into the cavernous, dangerous void of the subterranean baggage handling zone. His brown eyes never left the black plastic case, which the conveyor belt was carrying away at 3 meters per second, hurtling straight toward the shark's mouth, the high-power X-ray screening area for heavy cargo. What was inside that case? Why was Bolt reacting so violently, breaking every single rule of his training? Carter didn't know, but seeing his loyal partner charging headlong into peril, he knew a catastrophe was looming, and time was measured only by the frantic beat of his own heart. Time seemed to freeze in the moment the heavy baggage cart plunged over the edge of the ramp. Sergeant Carter stood paralyzed at the top of the stairs, his heart torn in two. Half of him wanted to chase after the man in the fake uniform who was fleeing into the crowd, but the other half screamed as he watched his four-legged friend charge into certain death. The enormous black plastic case slammed violently against a metal safety railing, producing a deafening crash like a sledgehammer hitting iron. The impact was so severe it sprang the safety latches on the side of the container, causing it to wobble wildly before it plummeted onto the massive conveyor belt system below. Bolt didn't wait for a command. He didn't need one. In the German shepherd's mind, every training protocol about apprehending criminals had been erased. Only one powerful, burning instinct remained: protect whatever was inside that black box. Bolt! No! Carter's shout was lost in the airport's clamor. But Bolt's black and tan shadow was already out of his reach. The dog sprang from the edge of the tiled floor, leaping over the meter-high safety barrier. It was a perfect jump, but the destination was a nightmare. Below the baggage handling basement was a world utterly different from the gleaming facade of the terminal above. It was a labyrinth of machinery, noise, and speed. Dozens of pitch-black rubber conveyor belts intertwined like giant pythons, running with a ceaseless, terrifying rumble. Yellowish light from the low ceiling cast flickering, menacing patches of light and shadow. Bolt landed hard on a rapidly moving conveyor belt. His forepaws skidded on the slick rubber surface, claws scratching downward with a terrifying screech. But Bolt regained his footing almost instantly. His dark brown eyes locked onto the target, the black plastic case moving rapidly ahead. About 10 meters away, the case was on conveyor belt number 7, the high-speed route for priority luggage. It was heading straight for a colossal machine at the end of the dark tunnel. This was the high-power X-ray security scanner. The machine's entrance looked like the gaping maw of a steel monster, emitting a faint purple glow and the deadly hum of high-voltage electricity within. Heavy lead curtains hung down across the opening to prevent radiation leaks. Any living creature passing through those curtains would be subjected to a massive dose of radiation, enough to cause irreparable damage or worse. Bolt seemed to sense that danger. He let out a deep, throaty growl and began to run, running against the current, racing the machine. Carter had already sprinted down the maintenance staircase, running along the iron catwalk parallel to the belt, yelling into his radio, "Center, shut down conveyor number 7 now. Emergency, shut it down immediately." But he knew the process for shutting down this giant system took time, and time was the one thing they didn't have. On the conveyor, Bolt faced successive obstacles. A hard red suitcase from a side lane suddenly slid down, blocking his path. Bolt didn't slow down. He braced himself, leaping over the suitcase like a professional hurdler. Immediately after, an automated sorting arm, a long metal bar used to shunt luggage onto another lane, snapped out from the sidewall. It lunged with enough force to break the ribs of anyone who collided with it. Bolt's reaction was lightning fast. He dropped his center of gravity, pressing his belly against the vibrating conveyor surface, sliding underneath the metal arm in a fraction of a second. The fur on his back brushed against the cold, sharp edge. The distance to the black plastic case was closing. 5 meters. 4 meters. But the case was also nearing the X-ray entrance. The heavy black lead curtains were less than 15 meters away. The hum of the X-ray generator grew louder, sounding like gigantic hornets. The conveyor suddenly angled downward, gaining speed to feed the cargo into the scanner. The plastic case slid faster, wobbling as if about to topple over. Bolt knew he couldn't just chase it. If he simply ran up and bit the case, the momentum would drag both of them into the death machine. He needed to stop the case. He needed to become a wall. When the gap narrowed to 2 meters, Bolt put all his strength in his hind legs. The thick muscles in his thighs bunched like steel cables. He made the decisive leap. Bolt didn't jump at the case. He jumped over it. The dog's body stretched out in midair, flying over the black plastic mass. For that fleeting second, Carter, gasping for air on the iron walkway, felt his heart stop. He watched his partner do the unthinkable. Bolt landed, not behind, but directly in front of the plastic case, right in its path. He touched down on the slick conveyor surface, immediately turning to face the oncoming cargo. The heavy case slammed instantly into Bolt's chest. Thump! The powerful impact pushed Bolt backward. The conveyor belt under his paws continued to roll forward, and combined with the weight of the case and the downhill slide, it created an enormous pushing force against the dog's body. Bolt did not fall. He spread his front legs wide, lowered his chest, transforming his body into a wedge that halted the case's momentum. His sharp claws dug deep into the thick rubber surface of the conveyor, desperately seeking traction. The high-pitched screech, rang out as Bolt's claws scraped the belt surface. The force was too immense, pushing the dog slowly backward toward the scanner entrance. 10 meters. Bolt growled, sinking his teeth into the nylon carrying strap on the side of the plastic case. He used his powerful jaws as an anchor, applying his full body weight to drag the case down, fighting the mechanical force. 5 meters. Carter screamed into the radio, his voice strained with despair. "Shut it off. God damn it, shut it off." Bolt felt the heat radiating from the machine. Behind him, the hair on his tail stood up from static electricity. He felt sharp pain in his chest and legs, his lungs burning from exertion. Yet his gaze remained unwavering. He could smell a distinct scent wafting from the gap in the case. The scent of life. The scent of a slow, steady heartbeat. He couldn't let go. 3 meters. The conveyor belt kept turning, indifferent and ruthless. Bolt was being pushed back inch by inch. His hind legs had reached the edge of the lead curtain. Just a little further back, and his tail and rear legs would enter the radiation zone. Bolt strained his body to the absolute limit. He twisted his head, throwing his weight to the side to try and knock the case off the belt. But the case was too heavy and tightly wedged between the side barriers. 1 meter. The black maw of the scanner was right behind Bolt. He turned his head for a second, then looked back at the approaching Carter. His gaze held no fear, only absolute urgency. And trust. Stop, please. And then the miracle happened. A loud clack resonated from the overhead speaker system, followed by the long, high-pitched whine of decelerating motors. The red warning. Lights on the walls extinguished. The system was powered down, but inertia remained. The conveyor belt didn't stop immediately, but slid a short distance further on its momentum. Bolt snailed, claws planted, using his last reserve of strength to fight this final sliding drift. The plastic case pressed hard against his chest, pushing him back another few centimeters. Then everything went silent. The engine noise ceased entirely. The conveyor belt stood still. Bolt lay sprawled on the conveyor surface, his rib cage heaving violently. His nose was barely a handspan from the deadly lead. Curtain, the black plastic case, lay securely in front of him. The silence in the basement was eerie, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of the brave dog. Bolt refused to get up, maintaining his defensive position, jaws still clamped onto the case's strap, eyes alertly fixed on the surrounding shadows, as if daring anyone to approach the cargo he had risked his life to protect. Carter jumped over the railing, scrambling to his partner's side. His legs trembled as he landed. He saw the shallow, bloody scrapes on Bolt's paw pads, saw the fur matted with black machine grease. Good boy. Such a good boy, big guy, Carter whispered, his voice catching, his hands shaking as he stroked the dog's head. Bolt released the strap, gave Carter's hand a soft lick, then immediately turned back, nudging the gap in the plastic case strongly with his nose, letting out an urging whimper. Carter understood. He swallowed hard, staring at the cold, black case. What was in there that made Bolt, a dog of iron training, act so recklessly, so emotionally? He pulled his multi-tool knife from his hip, hands slick with sweat, preparing to uncover the secret inside. The silence that settled over the MIA baggage handling basement was heavier and denser than any noise that preceded it. The engine of conveyor belt number 7 was completely off, leaving an unsettling stillness, broken only by the small, rhythmic dripping of hot machine oil and Bolt's heavy, labored breathing. Sergeant Mike Carter still knelt on the black rubber conveyor belt, his left hand on his canine partner's shoulder, his right gripping the Leatherman multi-tool. Sweat dripped from his forehead, down his nose, tasting salty. In front of them, the black Pelican case lay still like a giant rock. It was less than a handspan from the lead curtain of the X-ray machine. Bolt, exhausted from his struggle with the massive machinery, refused to lie down and rest. The German shepherd stood in a protective stance, all 4 legs trembling from extreme muscle strain, yet his head remained high. His nose was pressed against the seam where the lid met the body of the case, continuously sniffing and letting out small, urgent whimpers. All right, Bolt. Easy now, big guy, Carter murmured, his voice hoarse. He could feel the heat radiating from the dog's body and the frantic pace of his heartbeat through the thick fur. From the iron staircase, heavy footsteps pounded, shattering the stillness. The support team had arrived. Flickering flashlights swept through the darkened space. Mike, are you okay? Lieutenant Ramirez's voice called out, full of concern. He was followed by 2 EMTs with a stretcher, and a TSA team carrying pry bars. I'm fine, but we need to get this thing open immediately. Carter yelled back, without turning his head. He knocked hard on the plastic lid. There's something inside. Bolt won't leave. He's confirming a life. Ramirez jumped the railing, landing on the conveyor next to Carter. He looked at Bolt, the dog with scraped paws and matted fur, then at the mysterious black case. A life? You mean smuggled animals? Cats or dogs? I don't know, Carter replied, beginning to pry at the thick tape wrapped around the latches. But Bolt has never been wrong, and he's never risked his life like this for a cat. This plastic case was a high-end model, designed to be waterproof and shockproof, meaning it was also highly airtight. The stainless steel latches were already warped from the fall off the cart onto the conveyor. Carter ground his teeth, using the knife blade to force the gap. Metal scraped against metal, with a high-pitched screech. Be careful, Ramirez cautioned, shining his flashlight on Carter's work. If there's a pressure bomb inside. It's not a bomb, Carter stated with certainty, though a vague fear was rising in his own heart. Bolt didn't signal explosives. He's signaling a rescue. As Carter wrestled with the stubborn latch, the radio on Ramirez's shoulder crackled. It was the voice of the security captain from the terminal above. Team 1, status report. We've apprehended the suspect at exit 4. He's screaming like a lunatic. Ramirez pressed the transmit button. We're in the number 7 conveyor pit, attempting to open the suspicious package. Was the suspect confessing? The reply over the radio sounded confused and annoyed. He's a low-level baggage thief named Gary. He swears on his life he was only trying to steal expensive camera equipment. He saw the Pelican case marked fragile and thought he'd hit the jackpot. He claims he didn't know what was inside. He hadn't even had time to open it. Carter paused for a moment. A luggage thief, not a terrorist, not a professional kidnapper, just random greed. This eliminated the theory of a sophisticated trap, but it increased the likelihood of a foolish, tragic accident. Damn it, this latch is jammed solid. Carter swore. The lock had been bent inward from the impact. Use this. A TSA agent handed him a small pry bar. Carter inserted the end of the pry bar into the gap, using all his strength to lever it open. Bolt stood beside him, barking a sharp, encouraging woof. Clank. The sound of the latch snapping echoed crisply. The case lid sprang open a small distance. A rush of air escaped from within. Bolt immediately shoved his nose into that gap. His tail, which had been tucked tightly between his legs, now began to wag gently, tentatively, yet full of hope. Carter took a deep breath, nodded to Ramirez, and together they grasped the lid. Hoisting it open, the beams of flashlights from 4 directions converged on the interior of the black case. For the first second, no one spoke. Time seemed to stand still. The seasoned soldiers' brains took a moment to process the image they were seeing because it was so contrary to the surrounding scene of death, oil, and iron. Curled up within the soft, shock-absorbing foam lining was a little boy. He looked about 6 years old, with curly, messy blonde hair. He wore a red superhero t-shirt, denim shorts, and large child-sized noise-canceling headphones around his head, typical for flying. In his small arms, he was clutching a well-worn brown teddy bear. The boy's eyes were tightly closed, motionless. Jesus Christ. Ramirez breathed out, his voice faint. Carter felt his heart sink into his stomach. How long had this sealed plastic coffin been closed? 15 minutes? 20? How much oxygen was left? Bolt didn't wait. He leaped up onto the edge of the case, lowered his head, and began licking the boy's face frantically. Rough, wet, and urgent licks. The dog whimpered, nudging the child's cheek with his nose, as if to say, "Wake up! Wake up! Now! Medics! Hurry!" Carter yelled, waving the EMT team forward. But before the medics could touch him, the boy's eyelids fluttered. The noise-canceling headphones had shielded him from the horrific crashes and the machine's roar outside. The thick foam padding had protected his small body from the impacts when the case fell, and the slight oxygen deprivation had only caused him to fall into a deeper-than-normal sleep. The boy wrinkled his nose, tickled by Bolt's tongue. His wide eyes slowly opened, blinking sleepily against the harsh flashlight beams. He pulled the headphones down to his neck, looked at the large dog standing over him, and then at the uniformed men surrounding him. Instead of screaming in terror, the boy rubbed his eyes, yawned a wide yawn, and asked in a sleepy voice, Did I disappear yet?" The entire security team froze. Carter blinked, unable to believe his ears. "What did you say?" The boy sat up, hugging his teddy bear, and looked around. The plastic case. "I'm Leo, the great magician. Dad said this case is my magic box. I went inside to play hide and seek. I was going to disappear and then reappear in New York to surprise Mom and Dad. But it was too dark in here and I got sleepy." A collective sigh of relief swept through the stuffy basement like a massive gust of wind. Ramirez barked a shaky, tense laugh that finally broke the silence. One TSA agent even had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. It turned out there was no kidnapping, just the wild imagination of a child, a moment of adult negligence, and the foolish greed of a thief that had created a heart-stopping scenario. But if it weren't for Bolt, Carter shuddered as he glanced toward the lead curtain of the X-ray machine. If Bolt hadn't blocked the case, Leo the magician would have truly disappeared in the worst way possible. That machine wouldn't differentiate between luggage and a sleeping child. Bolt, seeing his target awake and talking, immediately sat down on the conveyor belt. His tail, which had been tucked, now thumped happily against the rubber. The dog panted, tongue lolling out, his brown eyes looking at the boy with strange, gentle affection. "All right, magician," Carter smiled, his voice slightly choked with emotion. He gently lifted the boy out of the case. "The show is over. Your audience is waiting upstairs. And you know what? You were just rescued by a four-legged hero." Little Leo looked at Bolt, then reached out and patted the dog's head. "Thank you, doggy friend. Are you a magic assistant too?" Up in the main terminal, the chaotic atmosphere had not yet subsided. A young woman was kneeling on the floor, weeping with gut-wrenching sobs, while her husband clutched her shoulder, his face pale, eyes red-rimmed. They were Leo's parents. They were street performers en route to a gig. In a flurry of loading cumbersome props and checking in, they had lost their son for only a few brief minutes. When they turned back, both their son and the empty prop case were gone. Police had cordoned off the area. Passengers stood around, murmuring anxiously. The elevator doors from the basement slid open. The crowd fell silent. Sergeant Carter stepped out first. In his arms was not a gun or handcuffs. He was carrying a little boy in a red superhero shirt, and walking right beside him, limping but full of pride, was Bolt. "Now!" The mother shrieked, jumping up and rushing forward like an arrow. She snatched the child from Carter's arms, holding him so tightly as if to meld the boy into her own skin. The husband ran over too, kneeling to hug both of them, tears streaming down the rugged man's face. "Mommy, I can't breathe," Leo complained, still not grasping the gravity of the situation. "I was just playing hide and seek. You scare me to death," the mother sobbed, kissing every inch of the child's face. Never do that again." Sergeant Carter took a step back to give the family their privacy. He looked down at Bolt. The dog sat silently, watching the scene. One of Bolt's front paws was slightly raised in pain, and the scrape on his nose was still bleeding faintly. But his eyes were radiant, filled with the pure satisfaction of a working dog knowing a mission had been executed flawlessly. A passenger standing nearby, who had witnessed Bolt charging after the cart earlier, suddenly clapped. A single, crisp clap echoed in the large space. Then a second person. A third. Within seconds, the entire VIP lounge of Miami Airport erupted. The applause spread like a tidal wave, from one section to the next. Hurried passengers, security guards, pilots passing by, all stopped and clapped. Cheers and whistles rang out. They didn't know the specific details of what had transpired in the dark basement below. They didn't know about the death jump or the struggle with the X-ray machine. But seeing the child safe in his mother's arms and the battered yet majestic police dog, they understood that a miracle had just occurred. "Hero! That is a hero!" someone shouted. Leo's father released his wife and son, turning toward Carter and Bolt. The man, his hands still trembling, knelt right in front of the German Shepherd. He couldn't speak, only managed to grab Bolt's large, rough paw and pressed it to his forehead, tears wetting the tiled floor. Bolt tilted his head, letting out a soft whimper in his throat, then leaned forward to gently lick the tear on the man's face, as if to console him. "It's okay. It's all over." Carter crouched down, wrapping his arm around his four-legged friend's neck, burying his head in the fur that smelled of machine oil and sweat. He felt a lump in his throat. Today, they hadn't caught a drug lord or busted a terror cell. But this was undoubtedly the best day of his career. "Hey, Bolt," Carter whispered into the dog's ear, his voice just loud enough for both of them to hear over the roaring applause. "You're not just a good boy. Today, you're a legend." Bolt wagged his tail, eyes squinting as if smiling. Outside, the Florida sky was still blazing hot, but the storm in everyone's hearts had cleared, replaced by the warmth of humanity and wordless loyalty. The story of the little magician and the canine who could. Since a heartbeat quickly spread across the headlines the next morning, reminding the world that sometimes guardian angels don't have wings. They just have four paws, a wet nose, and a courageous heart ready to risk everything for human safety.